Hello everyone, I think we are live now. Hello Twitch. Thank you for joining us to our Next Level session. This is our sixth Next Level session and the fourth one we are streaming here live on Twitch. Today's topic is going to be tackling difficult topics in games, and I'm very honored to have these three awesome guests joining me here tonight. So we have Jörg Friedrich from Paint Bucket Games. Hi, Jörg. Catharina Bøhler, did I say that right?
Yeah.
From Saretta Studios in Norway. So and thank you for joining us. And Raul Carvajal from Games for Change from the US. Thank you for joining us as well. This is so cool. So I said already today's topic is going to be tackling difficult stories in games, and I'm super excited to talk about a topic like that because I think topics like that should be talked about more. They are not usually on the agenda of conferences or streams, but I think they should be. And I think that it's great that there are initiatives like Games for Change that we are going to talk about in detail later that are organizing conferences and events that are dedicated to topics like that. I'm also very excited to talk about this topic because I'm a game developer, and we are working on a game called The Cost of Recovery, which is about a family whose 9-year-old son suffers a stroke. So for all of our introductions, I prepared some screenshots. So I'm going to show some screenshots of our game on the Twitch stream. And of course, in a game that has the topic of a 9-year-old suffering a stroke, we have to think about how we tackle a topic like that and how we make sure that this topic is handled delicately. So I'm very excited to talk with the three of you and maybe even learn a lot of stuff on how to do it because it feels like I have a lot to learn from the three of you. So the way this is going to work is we are going to start with quick one-on-one introductions, and then we are going to go into a panel discussion. If anybody on the Twitch stream has any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And thank you also to Ollie, who is working in the background, collecting all the questions and preparing the questions for me in a shared document so that I don't miss anything that's sent in some chat somewhere. Cool, that's the front-loading part. Let's start with the discussion. Let's start with Jörg. Jörg, you are from Berlin, and you have developed a game called Through the Darkest of Times. Can you tell us what that game is about?
In Through the Darkest of Times, you play as a civilian resistance fighter in Berlin during the Nazi time. So basically, you start as a normal citizen right when the Nazis come into power, and you decide together with some friends that you need to do something about that and somehow fight it. But not with a gun, because that was not possible really, but rather spreading leaflets, writing slogans at walls, helping people to hide, and yeah, you're trying to get through the darkest of times, and yeah, not only survive but keep persisting as a resistance group, which is hard.
So, what motivated you to develop a game like that?
A couple of things. So the main one probably being that I founded together with Sebastian Schulz a small indie studio called Paint Bucket Games to develop Through the Darkest of Times. And that was like 2017 when we started. And we were worried about the state of the world, basically. Okay. We looked at the world and we saw, like, Trump becoming president. Then there's the right-wing party, the AfD in Germany, going into parliaments, local parliaments at first. There were racist riots and demonstrations, and about the refugee situation in Germany and so on, and all over Europe. And these were things that worried us, and we thought, what can we do? The only thing we're good at is making games. We have been making games since the early 2000s, and originally doing working in big games, so one of them being Spec Ops: The Line, for example, for a different studio. And we said, okay, how about we take our craftsmanship, that what we can do, that would be what we are good at, our art, and try to make something that, helps people to understand what happened 90 years ago in Germany. And maybe by doing that, we help preventing situations like this coming up again. And that was certainly a main motivation. And the other being that we love our medium, and we thought there's a gap in our medium when it comes to certain topics, and a gap that was interesting enough that it feels like we should explore it. It should be explored, and the borders of what people think the medium can do should be extended. And
okay, so is that the motivation for your company that you founded? Or is it something that just you were motivated to do for this one project?
No, it's certainly the motivation for the company as well. I mean, that's why we went indie, basically, to be able to do these kind of games that make an impact. They don't have to be all about this topic, but in general about topics that are undertold or underexplored. Like, for example, at the moment, or recently, we have been developing a game about democracy. It's also a historical game, but it takes place right after World War I in Germany. It's basically Stardew Valley, post World War I Stardew Valley. Okay. So farming RPG with political topics. So this is the kind of thing that we'd like to explore, both mechanically and art-wise and theme-wise.
You've already talked about working on Spec Ops: The Line, which I was also going to bring up, because that game is, for me at least, very special, because it feels like one of the few AAA titles that really were trying to convey an anti-war message. And I was very surprised when I played it years ago, because I didn't know that going in. I thought I was going to play a shooter like all other shooters. Then you talked about starting an indie company to tackle topics like that. Do you feel that AAA is moving away from difficult topics and more playing a safe game, and it's more left for the indie developers? Or do you think that AAA also is opening up to topics like ours?
I think AAA is opening up a little bit, but I mean, I think it's much easier for doing it in as an indie, simply because you spend less money. It's simple as that. The more money you spend, the more people expect the game to reach a big audience and bring all the money back, right? And the more, usually, to get all that money, you need more decision makers or more people who want to have a say, and that usually leads to the tendency, at least, of avoiding difficult topics, right? And that, I think, is the challenge in bigger productions. But in general, I think there's a lively exchange, and I'm also not the kind of developer who says like, oh yeah, it's all bad and commercial in AAA and so on. I worked there long enough to see that there are amazing people who really who are really great at what they're doing and who have best intentions. It's just a very different, it's just a different field, right? It's like also when you look at cinema or other mediums and say like, okay, do I make a summer blockbuster or do I make a movie that wins all the awards but might not reach that many people and not make that much money?
I see. Let's move over to Katharina. When I stalked you on LinkedIn in preparation for this panel, I saw that you founded your company 11 years ago. What motivated you to start your company at that time in your life?
Well, we were studying and we were done with our last year of studies, and the industry in Norway, especially back then, but kind of still, is quite small. And we realized that if we wanted to be able to work in Norway and do what we wanted to do, then yeah, we just had to kind of take things into our own hands and start a company. And also, we were actually 15 people that started up together. And one of the things I felt were so great about Sarepta was just the environment that we had when we started up the company and the group, and kind of the shared passion that we had, which we've been able to hold on to for 11 years. So.
Awesome. And then you developed a few games, one of them being My Child Lebensborn. Can you talk to us, what is that game about?
Yeah, so My Child Lebensborn is a parent simulation game where you care for a Lebensborn child. So this child is born by a German soldier and a Norwegian woman during the Second World War. And this is after the war, and you adopt this child and need to take care of them. And we're telling the true stories of what happened to the Lebensborn in our country, just because we're half German, and it was not very good. So the challenge in the game is that you as a parent need to care for this child while everybody else tries to break them down.
So there is a lot of bullying going on. The children are having a hard time joining the society. Are those the topics that are tackled?
Yeah, they were treated like incredibly horrible. And so, for instance, one scene you get relatively early on is the child coming home and wondering what is a Nazi child? Why are they calling me this? And at that point, you've been doing some research trying to find their parents, and it's also up to you to try to figure out how honest are you going to be with the child? How are you going to try to help them get through and understand the hatred that other people have for them? So it's really about being a parent and facing something incredibly difficult like that. And we really see that people try to choose different parenting styles, and it's really engaging to see how they go through this together with the child and what they feel about it. Because our goal, we met a production company called Technopilot, and she was helping with the production of a documentary for the Lebensborn. And she realized this is just a movie about old people talking about the war, and it's going to be sent in the cinema. Like, no, or very few young people are actually going to watch this. How is this going to actually share their stories to the world? And she felt like we need to be able to do something more with this. And I not accidentally, but kind of randomly met her at a conference, and we started talking about it, and she asks, can we turn this into a game? And I said, I don't know, but but let's try, yeah. So
let's try. Cool. And then you go ahead.
And it really worked beyond our expectations. So yeah.
And then you developed the game for phones. I remember playing it on my phone, but since then you have released it on different platforms. Is that right?
Yes, it's also out on Steam, and the ambition is to get Xbox and PlayStation and Switch. The ports are made, but our publisher is struggling a little bit with some of it. So, but it will be ready and out by the end of the year as well for several platforms.
All right, cool. So this is a difficult question to answer, but do you feel that the game has been successful in its mission of showing people, hey, these children existed, and these children were treated poorly, and maybe also started thought processes in the players' minds about the topic?
Yeah, we definitely feel that this has really helped kind of enlarge people's empathy as well. Both when it comes to the topics of bullying, it's also been very helpful for some people who have experienced bullying themselves. And it really has spread the stories of the Lebensborn children. There's so many people, even in Norway, that didn't know that this was going on. It's gotten attention politically. It's gotten attention from both kids and adults alike. So we really feel that we've been able to do way more than we set out for, actually. We've had The Guardian writing about the topic. We've had other instances contacting us and wanting to do a story on this because they want to try to inspire others to maybe write or make games about the story of, for instance, the comfort women in Korea. So yeah, we feel like there's a lot we've been able to do. As well, we're working now on getting a voluntary organization up for children born of war, which will be funded by the game, and so by the players who all engage in the story. And there's so much incredible love for these kids, for Karin and Klaus in the game, and people just want to continue to take care of them. They want to do something. They want to try to make things better for others. So yeah, it's the gamers are incredible, really.
Awesome. It's so cool that you are even that you're so passionate about the topic that you're now starting this initiative to even foster to move the topic further. So this is really cool. Let's move over to. Oh, you want to say something?
No, yeah, I think it's just a symptom of what happens when you try to work with these type of themes, and you end up talking. We talk to so many like professors who work on the topic, and so many people who care about it, and them coming together and saying that there's not enough. We need to do more. So
okay.
Yeah.
So what else can we do? Okay.
Yeah.
So cool. So Raul, what else can we do? You are working for Games for Change. Can you tell us a bit about that? What's Games for Change?
Sure. So hello everyone. My name is Raul Carvajal. I'm representing Games for Change. We're based out of New York City, although I'm calling from the West Coast of the United States, south of Los Angeles. And we've got, I think, a very simple mission here, and have for a long time, which is to elevate the conversation around video games and immersive experiences that are being used for social impact. And that is purposely a very broad mission, because we are taking a very big tent approach to what it means to have an impact game. And we think about this on a spectrum from very specific localized impact for particular audiences to something that may not be advertised as an impact or a serious game, but whose work, story, representation of characters may be pushing the needle as well. So we think about games in education, we think about games that are being used in healthcare settings, but we also think about games that are raising awareness around civic and social issues, like the games that we just heard the other creators on the panel talking about. We do this in a couple of ways. One is highlighting the work of creators through events and panels, discussions like this one that we organize. We also have a festival that happens every year that I help produce personally, and that is a large undertaking. We had our largest festival ever this past July, all online over the course of the last 2 years, of course. Traditionally, we hold this thing in New York City, something like 1,100 people or so, all coming together to talk about games in these applications, and that includes an audience of not just developers, but also consumers, families, students, academics, researchers, funders, policymakers, healthcare workers, right? You name it. Anyone who's really like believing in these sorts of applications has a home at Games for Change, and we're very proud of having an intersectional audience that way. But of course, with COVID and the pandemic, we have pivoted a lot in the last year or year and a half to making more of our events virtual, online, and accessible to folks maybe who weren't able to come to New York City for whatever reason. And that has really expanded, I think, the reach of some of these messages. We increased our attendance at the festival by like 600% or something going in last year, and that continued. We had something like 130 countries represented from our attendee base this year as well. So we are seeing more than ever that, like, you know, folks are thinking about how this medium might mature to tackle non-entertainment use cases in some cases. So that's been extremely exciting for me as our director of production. But I also have a particular attention to XR, virtual reality, augmented reality, those sorts of immersive technologies, which I think are disruptive in their own way. But one thing that I've noticed is that Games for Change, I think, was launched in 2004 or so. So we've been around for some time. And for a very large portion, I would say, of that history, our central issue was getting folks to even consider that games were something else or something more than maybe what their preconceived notion was, outside of just like this explicitly entertainment focused or entertainment driven product. And it was an uphill battle, certainly, to have some more of these folks invested and actually show up into the room and listen and take that back into their work. So it took a long time for that audience to grow. But I think that what's exciting about XR specifically is that even at an early stage in this new or this latest wave of development, 2014, 15, 16, we already saw even some of those early prototypes explicitly thinking about like real world impact and what these sort of stories were going to be teaching or impacting an audience with. So it was somehow more natural, I think, for those creators to see that potential or that line, that what folks would experience within these media, they would then be able to bring back out. So we've taken that to heart, and I think that it's been extremely exciting to see some of the work that's come out of that particular side of our industry. But as I say, we are a large organization in terms of the sorts of things that we're featuring, but small in regard to how many folks are actually working at Games for Change. We've got a really invested group of volunteers internationally, some of whom have taken up chapters outside of the US. We've got chapters in Latin America, based in Brazil, chapter in Asia Pacific, chapter in Europe, and a chapter that we just announced launching in South Africa as well. So these folks are thinking about these topics a bit more regionally, whereas the original headquarters is thinking about it certainly from a global scale, international scale.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you personally do? So you said you are the director of production. What does that mean? And maybe in the same spirit, why did you join Games for Change? What motivated you to join and do the work that you do?
Totally. So I started at Games for Change in 2018, and it was for a very specific and short contract. They needed somebody for 6 months to help produce the festival that I mentioned. And so I was coming onto a team of 2 or 3 to help produce that. And this was coming off of my experience historically, which was more in traditional media, filmmaking, film production, and also thinking through 360 filmmaking and virtual reality interactive at a very, very early sort of prototyping phase. So in school, I was already thinking through some of these concepts, had been a lifelong gamer before that, and was already, I think, quite aware of the sorts of games that I was starting to become more attracted to outside of the AAA space, more in like the indie realm, which were tackling new stories that I hadn't seen before. And when I got the call at Games for Change to be involved in this festival, it seemed like a very easy fit for me because I was already thinking through some of the work that was being featured there. I was excited to meet more creators and support an organization whose mission seemed so pure. So I joined up on the success of that festival, started working here full time with the mission to really think through the logistics of all of our initiatives. So like the convenings is certainly one aspect of what we do. But the other side, of course, is like all of these other programs and initiatives that we're doing either internally or externally with partners. One example of the internal being our student challenge, where we are running and teaching game design curriculum to middle and high school teachers around the country. And on top of that, operating a games competition, a game making competition for students. And they are simultaneously learning how to make games through their programs, through their classes with their teachers that we're coordinating with, but also are then building games around social impact themes and topics that are then submitted back to us, and we feature them in awards and give out scholarships and prizes, and it's a really nice time. That program has expanded over the last 5 years to include thousands of students, is now going international. We just recently announced that we're going to be developing some of that in the Middle East, which is quite exciting. So that's one more pointed, say, program that we're doing.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I help think through our strategy with initiatives like this, and also think through how we might work with other partners to support their work. That may be something as simple as bringing a slate of games or an arcade to an event that's happening. It may be more involved in saying, oh, hey, we are servicing this particular community, and we'd like you to facilitate a game jam around impact themes that maybe has a workshop at the top and help facilitate the actual creation of games during the week. That, again, is very exciting.
Cool. So when you, and maybe this is a question also for Catharina and Jörg, when you tell people that you work at an initiative like Games for Change, or for the others at games like you're working on, what are people's reactions? I remember when I first told my friends about the game that we are making, they were like, but that's not a fun game. They didn't know that games like this exist, so I'd be very interested to hear what your experiences are when you tell people what you are working on.
Yeah, I guess I'll take it from the broader perspective, because our mission touches lots of games. Surprise is almost always like the immediate reaction, some confusion maybe, especially when speaking to folks who I think are outside of the industry, right, and maybe are not as familiar with the medium in their day-to-day. But you certainly will encounter sort of like more community members who pay a bit more attention to the mainstream and are playing Call of Duty every day, or are on Overwatch and on some of these other large IPs, where of course like some of this stuff is not as visible, certainly. So yeah, I think the reaction is always surprise, but sometimes excitement as well, right? Because we're kind of like peeling the curtain away to a whole other realm of work that is really just speaking to the diversity of the creatorship, the craftsmanship of this industry.
That's a nice way to say it, putting the curtain away. So Catharina, what are your experiences?
Yeah, so my experiences is, like for instance, going and say, yeah, we're making a parent simulation game about children born of war. I think the reaction is usually confusion and then interest. And then people are trying to think, okay, wait, how are you going to be doing that? And it's like, wow, you can you actually do that? Isn't that scary to do? How are people going to reacting to that? And it's kind of strange because in my experience, it feels like everybody else feels that, wow, yeah, I would love something like that, but they don't trust everybody else to want something like that. So they're like, oh, but how is everybody else going to react? It's like, well, just like you, actually.
Just like you.
So yeah.
Yeah,
Where do you wanna go?
yeah. Yeah, I guess it's similar. Except that for us, I always had the feeling that, interestingly enough, people inside the industry and even people, other indie game makers, were, confused and in disbelief. It's like, how do you want to make that a game? How is that going to be a good? How is that going to be a good game? Where's the so can I kill Hitler? If I cannot, how is that any good? How can it be cool and fun and whatnot? But that was all only as long as you only have the concept. Whenever as soon as we had a prototype to play and we had them get what we were going to do and how we're going to do it, and they could actually experience it, then people got it, and the question stopped, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's cool, that's something. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think this reaction that people are initially like surprised and don't really know if games like this can work, is that because people don't think or don't feel like games are a mature medium, that people maybe think games are just for fun? Do you think that's something that the general population thinks about games, or do you think there's something else behind it?
Yeah, I think it has to do with that, right? That we experience games as, or that the games are often seen as this pure, light-hearted entertainment medium that gives you a good time for an amount of time, and is also a tool of escapism, and that's it. I think that has changed, but I think it changes. Every single game that tackles a topic changes it just for this one topic. So it's like, okay, games can now do this, and now games can also be about this. But whenever you come with something new, people will still be wary. And I think it's natural. I have to admit it. I didn't know if it would work before we did it. I think that's also something that is difficult with games that are exploring a new space, that you can't tell beforehand if it's going to work or not. You need to explore it and try it out and have people then experience it to see whether it works or not. So
I agree, but also disagree on some of that, actually. Because, well, I guess it comes down to the type of gamer as well. Because there's so many games that were already doing this in some sense, maybe less blatantly, but anyone that cried when Aerith died, spoilers, sorry, in Final Fantasy VII, or anyone who, well, again, maybe also cried when you were playing Aiko and the controller's shaking when you feel the heartbeat of the girl. Like, I think, at least me growing up, even in Zelda, like, I felt some of those stories, sure, they were simple, but they were so moving to me. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go into games. So I think, yeah, for some gamers, I think a lot of gamers are excited to see more and more happening and kind of feeling like this is kind of what I've been waiting for. But of course, you do also have a lot of the, for instance, non-gamers. I feel those, and maybe some of the game developers as well, yeah, can be quite jaded maybe now. I feel like, well, we just got to earn our money, you can't really earn money on this type of thing, so it's nice for you, but yeah, it's just going to be art, it's not going to be a business. I think the worst people though are the non-gamers. Like, there was a politician coming by here, one of the largest ones in Norway. He was coming in with his arms crossed, like, games, ugh. But then, yeah, showing examples of what we can do, I think really helps, and he completely changed his opinion on games. So I think, yeah.
I would say
both yes and no.
I think I maybe lean in your direction there, Catharina, especially with regard to the expectation of the traditional gamer. And even saying that is like painting with too broad a brush, right? Because we know that there are many different sorts of folks who are playing these games, but especially when we look at concentrations of player bases, say like in mobile or in a lot of these games as a service games, right? Where so many large communities and groups of humans are playing. Each of these things is part of a cycle, right? And if we're thinking of the media form as really just an idea that somebody will create given whatever they've experienced, it is more likely, say, that they will have encountered larger AAA titles that have massive budgets behind them, that are primarily commercial endeavors, right, in terms of how they are going to recoup some of that investment, which maybe then also leads to those teams making particular choices about the stories that they do tell and the stories they don't tell. And all of that comes back to the consumer in terms of, okay, well, what is a game, right? Like that will form some sort of idea. And we encounter this a lot at Games for Change, and I mentioned it in my initial debrief, but I think a lot of work has gone into proving the case outside of the industry for other folks who might use this in their nonprofit work or in healthcare settings, whatever. But now we're also seeing like, okay, well, the same sort of work needs to happen inside as well, right? Because if we're going to change our idea of what a game can be, then it really starts with all games. And it's not just enough, say, to have more of these stories happening here. We also have to be thinking like, okay, well, what are the vast majority of people actually playing? And is there a way to maybe shift that needle as well?
So when the three of you talk about paving the way and teaching people that games like this exist, do you think this will happen through many smaller indie games? Or maybe there might be one big AAA blockbuster that's tackling a difficult topic and suddenly everybody thinks, hey, games can do this? Or is it maybe a combination of that, or maybe just a slow opening up towards topics like this in all sizes of games? What do you think? How will the transformation in people's minds happen, if you think it's going to happen?
I think it's a combination of what you've said, particularly with regard to the fact that I think about like my media consumption in other forms, right? And I guess I think about the questions I ask myself for, oh, why do I read a book, or why am I watching this show, or why am I going to the theater to see this film? And I am looking for very particular, I have built a taste, right, for some of those formats. And that is also true of games, because I've made some of those connections personally, and I've come to want something different for myself and some of the games that I've experienced. And I often find that, somebody is totally fine, like explaining how they're a massive fan of deep dramas in films, and they will only watch like heavy hitting documentary in film. And they have that expectation of the form there, but are not necessarily willing to say like, oh, I want to find something like that in games, when you totally should be, right? Like that is out there, and you can certainly find it. So it's a visibility thing, I think, and it's also a critical mass audience thing, right? Like once games, I think, are entering general consensus and consciousness in terms of like what are we consuming when, it will be easier to have like all of those forking paths for any given taste.
Yeah, I think we need to get it in through many different channels, and in some places also maybe sneaking it in where people don't expect it. So, yeah, more surprise emotional content would be amazing. And then we do need to done some presentations for parents to also teach them what games can be. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely agreeing on both of those. I think it's going to be a combination, and we're going to see games in general explore more topics and more nuances of themes and emotions, and I think you will see this reflected in both small games anyway, but also in bigger games where it fits, because while the big games are sometimes slower and more careful in when they explore new areas. They're still also exploring new areas all the time, right? And I think we see some of that already sometimes. And yeah, and I think like even if I look at I think a Call of Duty World War II was already different than Call of Duty, the first Call of Duty in that regards. But it's still a Call of Duty game, but there are scenes in it that you wouldn't have expected there, and that wouldn't have been possible 10 years earlier. And I think you see all games moving and exploring into these kind of areas, which is good.
Yeah. Now we just need it somehow into Fortnite.
In Fortnite.
Yes.
Yeah, that might be difficult to do.
I think there's one more aspect that maybe we haven't mentioned so far, which is, I think some of the topic diversity that we talked about, or the story diversity in some of these games as well, is really tied to who is making games and who is getting their games published. So I don't want to understate the fact that historically this industry has skewed in a very particular direction, and we've entered a phase where many more people are able to make their games now and get them out into the world and have a very different perspective, say, on some of the narratives that we've seen. And I think that's extremely valuable. We've seen that on the G4C side as well and have celebrated it. So many more creators from different parts of the world, I think, will only help this endeavor.
Many more creators and also many more projects like this, which hopefully are also successful endeavors financially, which can be a challenge. I know from my own experiences, it's been a bit difficult finding a publisher for our game, because not every publisher wants to get their hands on difficult topics. Do you think that's something that the industry is going to grow over? And do you think maybe we have to come to terms as creators of games like this that maybe our target audience is a lot smaller, and so our business lookouts might not be as good as if you were just making fun games? What do you think? Are we in danger of having a smaller target audience? Catharina.
I feel like jumping in on that, because it's not, though. Like we've seen that the target audience is not that small. And initially, yeah, we had problems getting publishers, so we self-launched it on mobile. Just because it was a premium game on mobile. And we suddenly had, and it took us a little while. Sure, we got critical acclaim and stuff, but we didn't really earn much money. And then we suddenly had someone picking it up in China. It wasn't even translated to Chinese, so we needed to get help with that. And it started doing really well. Just because we found that actually for young people to older people in China, they said that they just really like to cry. And you had a lot of people saying, oh, I never play mobile games, but I played this one. Or they say, oh, I don't really play games, but this one works for me. So I think it's possible to actually kind of, or not even awaken, like there's a niche, or not just a niche, there's a big target audience there. And even though we felt like, okay, we've had financial success on this game now, actually now 3 years after, just this summer, which is kind of sucked because we were supposed to be on vacation, suddenly people were writing about the game more in Brazil, and suddenly it went over to TikTok. And now in 1 month, we got so many people playing across the world, but suddenly now in the US and Brazil, that it's actually now funded 1 year of development for us. And we never would have thought that. But I think there is a target audience there. It's just being able to reach them and identify them. And I think that's going to be easier going forward when people are having these experiences. And we are also noticing, like with some of our newer games, there are a lot more people or publishers interested in talking about the new project, especially because they've started seeing how this emotional topic gives the game a bit of an edge. And it's actually really, really good when it comes to marketing. Like, we're not cynical people, but if you're going to be, I had to sell this into our board of how we're going to earn money on it, and just saying like, well, we're touching people's hearts, which means they want to talk about it, which means, like our game, it can actually go viral even 3 years after launch. So yeah, sorry, I'm so excited about this happening, and I think it really proves that, sure, it's difficult, but there is some real potential there.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. So it's good to hear that you're having a good time finding a publisher and finding an audience. Do you think in general maybe it's harder than for other games to reach this target audience?
I think they can, but one thing, I don't know how everybody else is on it, but surprisingly enough, TikTok was a great channel. Yeah, you reach like 12, 13, 14-year-olds, some adults as well, but yeah, I would recommend that channel to share emotional topics.
Okay, Jörg, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic as well. I think in general, and I don't think I'm not sure if it's harder, really, because making making a game with a topic or a theme or in gameplay that is more mainstream or more, along the lines what other games is doing, automatically puts you in a crowd with all these other games, right? Which is then also doesn't make it easy to find a publisher, because if they're like, yeah, but there's like making a nice game there, and we know this kind of stuff might work on the market. However, there are already 500 other games like this. So why should we publish yours? So I honestly believe that that finding a niche as an indie is crucial. That it's really important to do something that kind of stands out, and difficult topics. If you're doing it, difficult topics means you stand out, right? That alone is not enough to make a good game and to make it successful, but it's a start. It makes certain things even easier, I would say. As Catharina said, marketing might, or the game going viral might just happen because it has an unusual topic and something that people like to talk about.
I would also say something that we've seen with other projects who have maybe tackled difficult subject matter. I do see a lot of self-publishing, especially for the first project, maybe for a given team. And then the other side of this is that we have a lot of folks thinking non-traditionally about the economics of recouping investment, right? So maybe some folks are explicitly doing this work as partnered with an NGO or a nonprofit or a government entity who is particularly passionate about getting more engagement on an issue, and games is a vehicle for that, right? And maybe they're willing to fund the whole thing and think through distribution strategy. Suddenly that's like a very different proposition, right? Because it's a way for you to get your work out there with somebody who's already tapped into a particular community, an audience potentially. So it really flips the script, I think, in an interesting way. So finding some external partners in that regard is cool too. I think something else though, and this goes back to what you've mentioned earlier, Catharina, is that there may be something that you as a creator have an inkling that would be interesting, like, oh, I would like to see this in a game, but maybe you don't have the trust that others will connect to it. But at the end of the day, right, like, you're a human, and you came to that conclusion that this was like an interesting thing that was worthwhile for you to explore. I think it would be extremely weird for you to think that you were the only person to have that thought, for you to have had a unique thought in this world. So all that to say that I think audiences are out there. There are others that think like you, and it's a matter of finding them.
Okay, so when it's we're talking about how hard it is to make these games, maybe we can talk about how hard it is to actually make the games. So developing games that tackle these subjects comes with a lot of extra hurdles. So I know from my own experience in making a game about a 9-year-old that suffers a stroke. So we have to make sure that we get a lot of things right, a lot of medical facts. We have to make sure that the people's reactions in the game make sense. And suddenly you have to watch out that nobody's feelings are hurt. Like thinking about the players who may have experienced the same things, that their feelings don't get hurt. Is that something that you experienced as well, Catharina and Jörg, when developing your games, that you had to think a lot about dealing delicately with a topic, and you had to maybe put in a lot of more research time than you would have with other projects? Did the project get harder in that way for you? Maybe Jörg can start.
Yes, definitely. I mean, yeah, we were very not worried, but we were just uncertain, and yeah, we didn't want to offend anyone, or and especially not people, like children of resistance fighters or people who were persecuted by the Nazis, and we didn't know, because it's something new to make a game about this, or it was something new about make a game about these topics, how they would find it. So yeah, we tried to be very careful by putting in extra effort, seeing reading everything that's out there written by academics about games and the topic, which was actually a great source, I have to say. There was quite a lot about. When we started, there was a lot of discussion going on in German-speaking academics about games and the Holocaust. There was some great literature out there, so we could actually see, what's the discussion there right now, and where they see difficulties and so on. That really helped us. And then we connected with teachers, because we found that teachers are already very experienced in conveying difficult topics or these kind of topics to children or to young people in a way that doesn't that neither overwhelms them nor trivializes the topic, which was then very helpful for us and for our work, and in finding ways on conveying them. And then in the end, we were lucky enough that we got so much attention in the press while still developing, that a lot of people contacted us, like the grandchildren of resistance fighters, for example, or organizations and memorial sites and lots of historians. And we could start showing them our work and discuss what we're doing, and whether they think we're on the right path and so on. So yeah, it's more difficult, but it's also I also find it more exciting, I have to say, because you meet so many interesting people that you would never meet if you just make a game about something else.
Okay, cool. Catharina, what were your experiences?
Yeah, so it definitely ups the budget a little bit when it comes to what you want to develop, in the sense that you need to do research, you need to reach out to people. So if you're doing a story about someone, you really should be talking to those people, so you know that they're actually feel that you're telling their story properly. But at the same time, I feel that it does help a lot with creativity, Because you get outside of your head. Sometimes you just get stuck in your head as a game developer and you try to do something and you feel like, oh, I don't know if this is, like, you just get tired of what you're doing. But actually, if you're working with someone else that can teach you things that you never knew, you can really, really grow as a developer, and your product will become so much better. At least that's how I feel. Like, it sparks a lot of new ideas that you might never have thought of. And of course, like, it can also help with your branding, that like, you can engage a community in something that exists, and driving the motivation of the team as well, knowing that, like, you're already so excited about what you're doing, and knowing that there's like an added effect of maybe helping someone. Yeah, I think that's great. Of course, if the people that you are talking about are no longer alive, and of course that does make it difficult. But then again, reaching out to, as you said, talking to, for instance, teachers or someone who can give insights into other aspects of it, or historians as well. Someone who really, really knows the topic in and out. And in some sense, it takes a little bit of time to reach out to these people, but when they come in, they usually come in without, like, they want to be there, they want to contribute, and they're great sparring partners.
Yeah, I would say something quite special happens when you're able to have that person not just as a research source that maybe you tap into once, but somebody who maybe is playing a very active role in helping shape a story or provide feedback to builds regularly. That subject matter expertise, as we refer to it at Games for Change, is invaluable, really, and moving those folks into key collaborative positions, I would encourage across all of these games. The other thing I think, though, is that another benefit to doing that is players, I think, are becoming quite keen on pointing out authenticity or sensing whether or not something feels like it's authentic and legitimate. And bringing on collaborators such as these, I think, only helps with that as well.
That's so cool. Yeah, I like that, Catharina, you talked about motivating the team through this shared purpose. And that brings me to a question that was sent in advance to the panel by Sasha, a community member here. And he asked, can working on serious or difficult subject matter make the development of a game more depressing? And this is something that I heard a lot from developers of horror games who spend 40 hours a week, like, drawing super scary, gory monsters day in and day out. Is this something that you experienced as well, that working on a game with such hefty subject matter and working on both of your games seem to be very dark on dark graphics again and again. Is that something that really weighs on the shoulders of your team members, or did you find ways to protect your team from that? Maybe Catharina can start.
Yeah, you really have to be careful. Now, at least our graphics and everything are very peppy and nice and cute, and the character is lovely. But we did have, for instance, our lead programmer, Richard Barlow, who never played the game. He set up systems specifically so he wouldn't have to play the game because he just couldn't. And I definitely did not want to force him to do that. For me, I like emotions. I like to explore emotions. So I would cry at work. Yeah, I would go through and I would make things, write stories, and I would just cry. And it's like, okay, I have to go away a bit. I'll be back. But for me, that worked well. But you definitely have to be careful and actually talk with each team member to make sure that, making a traumatizing game doesn't actually traumatize them as well.
Mm-hmm. Jörg, what are your experiences?
There was definitely some kind of fatigue, if you want, after working for that long on mainly these topics. And there were there are topics within the topic that are especially dark, right? And working on that in winter time can be really grim and sad, and I think you need to make sure that your team and yourself still has still can get a distance to this kind of the work, and basically look at the bright side. Let's put it like this, and also have some, I don't know, fun time that has nothing to do with this, because it can be challenging, I think, and it certainly was. At the same time, for me personally, I think I'm also similar. I like emotions, and I'm fine with drama and tragedy and just being sad and crying and over a sad story that's happening in the game or that's just created. I can do that, and that's okay. But it's just, I mean, like, especially if you do the research, it's just sometimes it was very brutal, and you need to get yourself distance from that from time to time.
I wonder if I could venture a question for both of them, but I wonder how much of that is for either of your teams, like, made explicit, or how much of that is institutionalized, I suppose, like in your workflow or in your stand-ups, right? Like, is this something that is better handled on your team sort of like individually with each member and kind of gauging their responses and making sure that they've got individual attention? Or is there like a communal responsibility that maybe is vocalized?
In our team, there wasn't. It was all individual, because it was also a very, very small team. We were 4 people working on this. So it was all very personal anyway. You could see if someone is getting depressed by this stuff. I think now we're now a much bigger team now, and we're going to return to something similar very soon, or are in the process of it already. And I think we will need to institutionalize it in some way. I don't know how yet, though.
And generally, we have a very open team, and so, I mean, I would bring it up at times, just in general openness, but also, it was more one-on-one, and even though there were several people working on the game, very few of the people who worked on the game actually got the same amount of the brutality as I did. Because I was the one reading everything, I was the one writing everything, although together with my co-writer, who actually does humor games. So so there were just a few of the people, but I do remember that I'd actually forgotten because I was thinking, it's fine, because I'm mostly the only one going through and realizing these traumatic things. But then we were, right before launch, we were getting everybody to play test the game just to make sure that things were fine. And at that point, I did actually realize that I hadn't properly warned everyone. So I do think that it's actually a good idea to sit down with your team and maybe in the very beginning make sure that there's some outlet. And I think for the next games, if we go into something as harsh as this, we definitely try to put some more systems into it and make it so that people can realize what they're getting themselves into, and also feel like there's some kind of clear thing like what they can do if they start realizing that it's too tough.
For us it's similar. We're doing it on a one-on-one basis, but also, like Catharina said, not everybody has the same degree of exposure to the topic and others. So for us, it's also me who does most of the research and most of the writing, and some programmers on the team will just do programming and not be in contact with the subject matter too much at all. But it's an interesting topic to think about. How can we institutionalize these things? What would be team structures to catch that and really help people cope with that. And I think that's something that we can again look at horror games at, because that's a genre that I've heard a lot about in terms of people being exposed to horror topics every day at their workplace. So I'm guessing that the development teams there have some systems in place for that, or I'm hoping that they do. Yeah, when we are developing games like these, we never really know what the players will do. Like, we can do our best to send the right message and not offend anyone, but this is an interactive medium, so we don't know what players will do, and the more freedom we give them, the more they could turn the message of our game around. Jörg talked about maybe can you kill Hitler, but maybe people will play the game and help Hitler if you give them the opportunity to do that, which would be a different game than the one you developed, I know. But the question is, how can we make sure that with all the degrees of freedom that we give the players, with all the agency that we want to give them, how can we make sure that the players are still experiencing the right story, or the one that we intended them to experience? Do we have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think in a large degree you do have to anticipate the reactions of the player and the different players. Like, at one point for the game, or much of Lebensborn, we were planning actually on having there be several bad endings, like several things that could happen that you could mess up. But then we got some advice also of the fact that, well, maybe then not everybody's going to experience what you want them to experience. And also thinking about it, we felt like this child has gone through so much, we don't want to allow the player to mistreat them. So some players think that that's kind of annoying, but, like, for instance, if you don't feed the child over a couple of days, they will run away and you have to try again. Just because we won't allow that. Like, there's no room for that in this game, because that's not the point. So not allowing, that's something we've had to learn the hard way, to just make sure that we don't allow a player to play the game in the way that you don't want them to, even if it makes it less open and a little bit more linear.
Jörg, do you have thoughts on player agency?
Yes, yes, player agency can be tricky, but I think, yeah, I mean, we did the same thing basically. You cannot. This is a game about being a resistance fighter, so this is a game about someone who was historically willing to risk his or her life and the life of their family for resisting an inhuman politics and an inhuman government, and that is the game basically. It's like saying, in a shooter you cannot talk to the monsters because your role in this game is to kill the monsters. And in this game, your role is to play someone who is a resistance fighter. So, yeah, people can debate and say like, oh, but I want an open world game that where I can join the Nazis. So yeah, well then find that game. It's not this one. It's simple as that. I think that is part of the development and part of the design is to make a decision, right? Games always have borders, even the games that kind of pretend that they are completely free and borderless usually have some kinds of borders and rules, and players accept them. They are willing to accept them. You just need to set them and communicate them, and then some people will say like, oh, I wish this rule wasn't there. But in the end, it's your decision as a creator what rules you set up and what you also think which rules are important to tackle the topic in an appropriate way.
And I think you said something really important there, which is communicate, as long as you communicate it clearly, and I mean, that's not always easy, but if you manage to communicate it clear, then I do feel that people accept it.
And there's something to be said about, again, right, like so many of these massively popular properties are meant to get as many players as possible, right? Like we are a game for everyone. We want everyone to play. And I think for some of these stories and some of these projects, a lot of strength can be found when you lean into the fact that, no, this game is not for everyone, potentially. And that's fine, right? Like it doesn't need to be. And that can be liberating, I imagine, as a creator as well.
So, you go, Jörg.
No, I just want to agree. Yes, that is, it is.
Yes, it is. So you talked a lot about rules and agency and maybe interactivity, which, my camera's acting out, which is what's differentiating our medium from other media. Like the thing that we do differently is that players can do whatever they want and they follow rules. Movies work differently, books work differently. Do you think that games have a unique chance to teach in a more direct way and maybe have more impact than other media because they put the players into the shoes of the people? So in your game, for example, Catharina, people actually raise this kid. They don't read about it, they don't watch somebody doing it, they actually do it. Do you think that games through this interactivity have the potential to do more good than other media and have more social impact?
I mean, I don't think my answer will be that surprising, but yes, I do, because and not only are you in the shoes of someone else, but you have responsibility in the universe of the game. So you can sit there, and if you don't make a choice, then it's just going to wait for you, and it's kind of just sitting there. It's like, well, come on, make a choice. And I think it impacts you a lot harder than just being a passive spectator, because you can distance yourself, and you cannot distance yourself in a game.
I would say, if you don't mind me going off on a slight anecdote, sure. I was fortunate enough to interview for a separate project one of the creators of a smaller game called Kind Words that some of you may have heard of. And for those that haven't, it's a game where you are playing a character and you're on this computer terminal, you're in a room, and you are reading and writing messages of support to other players of the game anonymously. And literally it almost serves like an inbox of sorts. And folks will write out a short message about something they may be struggling with, and those are sent to other players who will receive them with no identifying information, and your only opportunity to interact is to send that person a reply in the hopes that there's some kind words that you're writing in support of their endeavor, right? And it's quite simple. And when I was interviewing Zyba Scott, the lead dev based out of Boston, he was very cautious of games, particularly impact games or serious games, where they say have a mission to build empathy, right? And the way that they're doing that potentially is by telling a compelling story, or by having players see a particular situation through the players that they're interacting with. And this was not really connecting for him as a creator. His position was more that I don't just want you to watch a situation that helps you build empathy. I want you to actually do the thing that will help you build empathy, which is to write the letter yourself. You're not watching a character write a letter. You are physically being asked to do it yourself, right? So there's something about the interactivity in the action and the verbs that we're building into our games that are directly connected, I think, to impact and to ultimate takeaway, right? That is the true strength. And not to say that emotional resonance of the story won't have an impact, and not to say that some of these narrative structures don't have weight, because certainly they do. But I think there's more opportunities, say, for folks to lean into verbs that are underexplored, say, outside of shoot.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the most impactful things we saw are actions in the game that you could do in My Lebensborn is that you can pet the head of the kid. But what it does is that, like, everything else you do, the stats that the kid has, like hunger, cleanliness, contact, will cost you time units. You have to go in and you have to kind of pay for it. But with petting the kid, you can get their comfort up just by spending your own time. And we actually noticed that like the first time we had that 5-minute demo, and Jörg was also talking about how important it is just to be able to show the demo, and we could just see that after 5 minutes and people petting the kid and the way that they reacted, that was actually enough for them almost in the game.
Yeah, I think games. So yes, I would also say games have a special chance in, maybe educating or maybe reaching people. There's just, as Catharina said, it's only in a game that you can make choices, that you can feel that you are responsible for what's happened there, that you can feel responsible for how things go, that you can feel guilty for doing something wrong, that you can feel proud for something that went well, right? That you cannot have this with any kind of passive medium. It's just not possible. So that's special. I think it also comes with certain challenges. I think it's much harder. Sometimes it can be much harder to create certain emotions in players, because as soon as you have systems, and you will always have some kind of systems, people might go and wander the path and just play the systems and eventually leave the theme and the topic behind and go for play the numbers, if you let them. But I also think that we're learning how to treat that, we as creators, and how to get how to find the right balance between the systems and the narrative, and creating the emotions. On one side, the way we want it, but also I think it can also be very at least as important, and that's is that to see what players can create out of your work, right? And that might go in completely new and unexpected paths. I also find a lot of joy in this if the game is system-based enough to allow this to people just play with it. And yeah,
interactivity is so incredibly exciting as a designer. It's and trying to anticipate what people are going to do, and then they surprise you and do something completely different and create something amazing. Like, I don't think, like with Minecraft, for instance, just the things that you can do there now. I mean, I feel, I don't know enough, but my impression is that a lot of the things that have come up there is actually because people started trying to use the game in new and exciting and like trying to just expand their creativity within that game. So yeah, I think we can continue and being surprised by the medium. Like, I think I'm gonna be surprised by the medium until the day I retire, which is gonna be a long time. So
cool. Yeah, we had a question that was sent in just about what you were talking about. You're playing the numbers, and also Catharina about the game design and interactivity. The question was, how do you define a win state for your games? Do people just want to make perfect decisions, and maybe they optimize the time spent with their kid to get the most points out of something, or do they maybe want to have the best experience, or the more narrative experience? We already talked a little bit about that, but I'd be interested to hear, how do you define a win state, or is there even a win state in your games, and how do you keep players from just optimizing the numbers? Maybe Catharina can go.
yeah, we were very lucky there in the sense that we can just take a lot of inspiration from just parenting. There is no perfect answer. And actually also just the fact that we were basing this off real stories meant that we had to make a really difficult choice, which was saying that no matter what you do as a player, you cannot change what happens to the kid, because that would be saying to the victims that, oh, if you'd just done something differently, this wouldn't happen to you. But that turned out to actually be a blessing in disguise, because it's then focuses a lot more on the kid. So it's more about, okay, this is happening to the kid no matter what, but how do you try to help the kid get through it? And the win state is just sticking with it, taking care of the kid, staying the course. And like, of course, there's many people. And for my sister, she would actually call me, like, almost crying. Is like, I think I made the wrong choice. I think I made the wrong choice. He called the other kids bad. I don't want him to hate them. And it was really funny, because I was sure at that point, like, okay, yeah, you're that type of parent. Okay. And just having to say, like, no matter what you choose, there will be positives and there will be negatives. And really, whether or not you made a good choice is up to you, because the child's perception of the world will adapt to the things you put into the child. So yeah, I think that really helps with the game as well. The fact that there's, like, at one point in the very beginning, we thought maybe we should have like a happy meter, and realized, like, no, we're not going to do that. We have a lot of emotion systems. Like, there's lots of stats going on inside the game, but the only way you see it is just through the animations and the words that the child chooses. So I think that's really lucky for us in the sense that we focus really hard on the fact that there's nothing to really win here. You just need to endure and do as best as you can and learn from the story. And of course, we were scared, like a little bit scared, like, well, are people gonna be okay with that? And then we just realized we don't care. So I think that helped as well, that we just like, yeah, this is how it is. And a lot of people came to us later and said that they really love the game because this is how it feels like to be a parent. So yeah, I think, but that's definitely more difficult in other games, probably.
Yeah. I think it's for us that was one of the hardest challenges on what to do with that, and like what, yeah, with the win state is one thing, or the when have you lost was a different question, right? How do you, because what does that communicate, right? Because we had very similar challenges to you, Catharina, in your game. We also had a set outcome, kind of, right? There was like, you could do things with your group and you could resist here or there, you could save someone or not, or you could maybe convince someone or maybe sabotage something here or there, but you could not stop the overall arc of history. Things that the war would come and the war would end, and all these things, they would happen no matter what you do. And yeah, for us, one of the toughest question was like, how do we... So say you have a resistance group and you play that for a year, and you do a lot of things, you do a lot of interesting actions, but then your group dissolves, and the game ends long before the war, because the game ends whenever the group is gone. And how do you communicate to the player that she hasn't lost the game now? Because we didn't want to tell you, like, okay, yeah, that's game over, you played it wrong, you need to play it differently, because the way you resisted was the wrong way, because that would have been, you know, kind of, we felt that wouldn't have been appropriate to all the people that actually did resist, and were all these groups that actually did not survive or persist until the end of the war, which were only very few. So what we used something then. So what we found was that what people really want is, they don't really want that's this game designer dogma that you learn sometimes as a game design student, that like, yes, a game is defined by winning or losing, and it has this certain state, and it has a measurable success, and otherwise it's not a proper game. And that doesn't work for these kind of games, I believe. And it actually does. It's also not true. It's not the case for all of the games. So so what we found was what players really want is they want a sense of closure. They want to have the feeling that no matter what they did, that the game is over and they brought it to a certain end, and it's not abruptly ending because they did something wrong, and it's a game over screen that yells at you and says like, "Yeah, you play again. You did it wrong." So what we did was we added an epilogue that is created. The characters in the game are procedurally generated, and when the group dissolves or you get arrested or die, your character dies, then the game ends at the date, the group dissolves, and then you get a little also procedurally generated epilogue, depending created by what you did, what the kind of character those was, and it tells you all the members of your group, what happens to them after the game ends. Like someone goes to the US and comes back to Berlin, another one dies at the Eastern Front, and so on. And so you have like this, okay, the story that I started ends here with this group, and if I play again, I will have a different story with a different outcome. But it, hopefully, that was at least the goal, and that's also what we got as feedback, is it doesn't feel like losing that much, more like, yeah, it's an end here.
Okay, I see. We are nearing the epilogue of our of our panel discussion as well. We are nearing the 1.5 hour mark. I have one final question for you, and maybe we can do a quick shot and make it quick. Are there any topics that you'd like to see more games handle? Or maybe if you can't think of a specific topic, maybe directions of topics. Maybe you'd like to see more medical topics, more wartime topics, or something like that. Do you have anything in mind where you think, oh, there haven't been too many games about this topic, but I'd like to see how that could work? Does anything come to mind for the three of you?
Well, I would really love to see things that could teach me about cultures that I'm not used to and experiences that I don't know of, and especially it could be universal themes but seen from a different culture. So, for instance, the fact that there are more African developers coming up now, that's really interesting, and I really want to play those games and see things from a different perspective.
Awesome. So, Raul, do you have anything in mind?
Sure. Yeah, for me, one thing that I lacked historically in my game playing in terms of exposure was seeing any sorts of games that were set in Latin American cultures that were not like exploitative. And I don't even necessarily need a game that is about a particular cultural thing that I am tied to, but I guess I'm more concerned with even setting like as a basis, because that is so rich in its own right. But topically, I'm personally very invested in exploring more ancient civilizations that were quite rich in their own right, but who were colonized and decimated. So I would love to see more games explore some of that stuff in Mesoamerica in particular.
Cool. Jörg, does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I would actually like to see on more games that explore collaboration in a way. I think Minecraft is a great example for this, but I think there could be so many more. And I think, yeah, that would be something that I would like to see, even taking, classical genres like city builders or whatever. But what would happen if you added multiplayer component that is not about competing, but about actually collaborating and trying to make the best space ever that you can imagine? Okay. And so that's one. And in general, I'd like to see more utopical games in a way that present a positive idea of the future. I think I think we could use some of that.
Yeah, we could use a little bit more positivity about the future. Yeah, for me it would be maybe intimacy or relationships and love. I know there are a lot of games about it, like dating sims, but a game that blew me away when I played it was Florence, which is a very simple, like half an hour game, but it really made me feel this relationship and that's something that games rarely do, and I would love to see more games tackling relationships. Cool. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been awesome. Our next level session, that's always difficult to say, is going to be in 1 month on September 23rd. And we always have a little poll in our community about what the topics should be. And I'm showing the poll right now on the stream. So the next topic is going to be leadership in game studios. So people in leadership positions, like how can they make sure that they are leading their teams in a good way, company culture. We've already talked about keeping the spirit up within the team when tackling difficult subject matter, so maybe that's something that we are going to talk about next month. So make sure to note that in your calendars, September 23rd. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, to the three of you. This has been awesome, and
thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here, and I'm going to end the stream in a few seconds.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.